If you were trying to develop the ultimate incarnation of a sports car or of a supercar, where would you take that vehicle? Well, many people would answer the Nürburgring. It's a fairly obvious choice, and loads of manufacturers do just that. It is the hallowed ground of developing an awesome street car. However, there is one place which I believe actually supersedes the Nürburgring, and this place is not only just as legendary, but arguably has given us more top-tier exotics than the Nürburgring ever has, and in a much more direct way. And I am of course referring to my favourite racing event, Le Mans. The Le Mans 24-hour event in particular. Le Mans has given us some of the craziest street cars in history. Everything from the Dauer 962 to the Toyota GT1 to the Mercedes CLK GTR and plenty of others as well. But at a certain point, those iconic street homologated vehicles, which 9 times out of 10 had to be done to allow the cars to compete, well, the rules changed and that stopped. And consequently, there is no Bentley Speed 8 road car, as cool as that would be, or some crazy Audi diesel prototype for the street. Once again, it would be very cool, but it wasn't a requirement. So, at best, what you tend to see is a trickle-down effect, if you will, of certain technologies or special edition liveries, that kind of stuff, that ends up finding its way onto a street car. Sometimes, though, it's far more direct, and this, I'm very glad to say, is exactly such an occasion, because I would argue that this is not only a badass Corvette, this may even be the ultimate Corvette. And I'm not just talking about the obvious stuff like how powerful is it, what's the top speed, of course that factors in, but I'm talking way more than that. I'm talking exclusivity, handcrafted exotic levels that you would usually reserve for a supercar that Corvettes, let's be honest, don't usually have. They aren't exactly known for being something that would worry Koenigsegg or Pagani in terms of attention to detail. That's not really what they're going for. However, this is just that. Now, this car was actually built by Pratt and Miller. And don't be fooled by the name, they don't make garden tools. This is a company who developed directly, in fact, both the C5R and C6R Corvettes that dominated racing in their time. In fact, they had 5 class victories in that very Le Mans 24-hour race. That's a pretty impressive start. It's not just a Corvette with a body kit though, because what Chevy actually did is they went to Pratt & Miller in around 2007 to develop some accessories for Corvettes, and I suspect what they had in mind was what I mentioned earlier, which is kind of a, special edition body kit of some kind for the street car. But Pratt & Miller, in their infinite wisdom, turned around to Chevy and said, well, you know what, if you really want us to do this properly, we're going to need a complete retool and re-engineering of what makes the Corvette C6 so great in the first place. So that's exactly what they did. The C6RS is essentially a ground-up reworking of an already great car. Now, this car, and this is very important, predates the ZR1. The ZR1 is a more powerful car. It has around, 630, 640 horsepower, courtesy of a supercharged V8. The top speed is claimed at 205. It's a very impressive car. About $100,000 too, so it's, you could say, the ultimate Corvette in a general sense. Many of those things are eclipsed by this car though. For one thing, it's a lot lighter, and although I couldn't find any exact weight, you can clearly see it's bound to be lighter because they completely reworked it. There's carbon fibre everywhere, from inside the hood to the skirting of the car with that aerodynamic, very C6R, ish body kit that it has, the rear diffuser, all this kind of stuff which is directly inspired by that GT1 car. But what they also wanted to achieve with the vehicle was not just some lightweight, one-off show car. They wanted it to be something that could be production built, low numbers, but still production nonetheless, with an actual price tag, road registered, built as this official model, just technically built by Pratt & Miller rather than Chevrolet, with the kind of amenities that a Corvette owner would still want. So yes, it's hardcore, it's lighter, it's faster, but for instance, it still has a lift kit. So even though they lowered the ride height by 1.5 inches, you can actually raise it automatically to get over speed bumps or get up on the driveway, the kind of stuff which you need in the real world. Now, the initial production plan for the C6RS was to manufacture an exclusive run of 25 cars, which would have been similar, and I don't think that would have been unintentionally similar to the Maserati MC12. And of course, similar era, rivals, all that kind of stuff. Celine, Corvette, Aston DBR9. It was a fantastic era for GT1. However, what they actually ended up producing was a much more modest 7. And although I cannot say for sure why that was the case, because I simply couldn't find that information, I suspect it has something to do with the fact that the car itself wasn't exactly heavily publicised by Chevrolet, even though it was in, of course, some magazines, but they were independent, and the fact that it's literally a $250,000 Corvette. And this is, again, before the ZR1. And even the ZR1 is pretty hefty at $100,000 for a Corvette to begin with. However, $260,000, I would say, is actually pretty appropriate for a car like this. And with only 7 built, it's even more exclusive. One of my favourite things about the car is that actually they built 2 versions. There was the coupe, which you can see most of the images, but also in 2008, which is when they were built, they unveiled a convertible version as well at the Sebring 12-hour race. In fact, in a somewhat reminiscent way of how Mercedes built coupe and roadster versions of their iconic CLK GTR, and in fact the roadster is worth even more than the coupe. What then about the performance? Because you'll notice I haven't said a huge amount about that. Is this just a visual styling package? Well, no, it definitely isn't, because as well as a still 6-speed manual gearbox, and of course a V8 as you would assume, it actually goes much further than being just a reskinned Corvette, because that engine, in at least one of these cars, and I'm not sure if they all had this or if it was just one of the 7, a K-Tech built, aka the same people who developed the engines in those C5R and C6R race cars, an 8.2-litre naturally aspirated V8. We're talking Viper territory. 600 horsepower, 600 pound-feet of torque, and again at the time, this predated the ZR1, and the Viper wasn't putting out anywhere near that kind of naturally aspirated power, even though it was slightly bigger in capacity and had 2 whole more cylinders. The end result of that was that in a test, the car was proven to be capable of 202 miles an hour, which again, you've got to remember, the ZR1 has 640 horsepower, can do 205. This has 600 horsepower, so about 30 or 40 less, and can still do 202. And of course, that body kit was directly inspired by the C6R, which again is not designed for top speed. It's a handling machine by definition. It's a race car. But it is definitely the ultimate Corvette as far as I'm concerned, and in a turn of events which will surprise precisely no one, the first car was actually sold to none other than Jay Leno. And I'm kind of surprised actually that he hasn't featured this one on the channel. Seems like a pretty special car, if of course he still owns it at all. So ultimately it's definitely an unsung hero because the vast majority of people don't seem to be particularly aware of this car. And I think it's a shame because this truly is a Corvette GT1 road car. They might not have technically called it that, but it has engineering from the same people who developed the GT1 car, even the engine builders of said GT1 car worked on it, and it's sanctioned by Chevy. It's a GT1 road car, even if they chose to not name it that. So as far as I'm concerned, this is one of the coolest Corvettes out there, certainly an exclusive one. And if a car like this, with such a dominating history at Le Mans and in various other events as well, still is not that well known, well, then how do these other unsung heroes stand a chance? If a Corvette can be forgotten, then of course some tiny little French supercar or a Chinese electric hyper whatever, of course they can be forgotten too. Ultimately though, this to me is a very cool Corvette. Of course, if you are new to Unsung Heroes as a series, I would recommend jumping down to the Discord chat, which is completely free down below, and you can vote on your favourite episodes of this series. And if you do plan to stick around here on the channel, I would strongly recommend slapping that notification bell, because otherwise you won't see my latest vids. But until next time, I'll see you then, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.